Welcome to our panel, which is titled Enroll or Roll Out, the Future of Higher Education. My name's Tom Lindsay, and I work on higher education at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and I'm honored to have our three guests who are going to address this question. All three are veterans of higher education reform battles. First, to my immediate left is Senator Paul Bettencourt, who was first elected to the Senate in 2014, represents Senate District 7, which encompasses most of West Harris County. To the senator's immediate left is Representative Carl Tepper. He represents House District 84, which is entirely within Lubbock County. He serves on the House committees. And is also father, Air Force veteran, and commercial real estate professional. And to his immediate left is Dr. Richard Johnson, who is the director of the Texas Public Policy Foundation's Booker T. Washington Initiative, which examines the effects of public policy on African American communities. Please join me in welcoming our three panelists. I should mention here, these are both the representative and the senator, very hardworking men, and in fact, Senator Bettencourt has to be back on the floor at 10, so please understand when he has to take off to do his duty for Texas taxpayers.
Maybe 10:15 if we're lucky.
All right.
So that's right.
We'll take it, Senator. I have a question that I want to address to all three of you, and first let me give the audience some background information. National surveys continue to show a growing distrust of higher education on the part of prospective students and their parents. To be specific, over the last decade, Gallup polls have shown a consistent decline in Americans' confidence in higher education. In 2015, 57% of Americans had a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in higher ed. 3 years later, in 2018, that had dropped to 48%. 5 years later, in 2023, only 36% of Americans reported a great deal or quite a lot of confidence. That's a 21-point decrease, not a 21 percentages, but 21 percentage point decrease from 2015. Now, to be sure, the decline has been particularly sharp among Republicans, with confidence dropping from 56% in 2015 to only 19% in 2023. But it is also evident across all major subgroups in the country, including Democrats and including independents. And additional surveys by Pew and Morning Consult have corroborated this growing distrust of higher education on the part of American citizens. So my question for you three, beginning with you, Senator Bettencourt, why is this happening?
Well, there's a fundamental disconnect between where higher education has been putting their emphasis on in the lack of fundamental teaching, and with a political agenda that's not supported by the majority of Americans. I'm talking about whatever three-letter acronym you want to use, whether it's DEI, CRT, pick one, okay? The emphasis has become about a leftist progressive mantra as opposed to getting kids out of school with a degree that emphasizes, the fundamentals of whatever that rigor is for that discipline. Now, we're seeing it also, too, in data in the public education, and Representative Tepper will follow with this, where, it used to be, 70-some-odd% of kids graduating high school wanted to go to college. Well, now it's down to 60. There is also, however, a burgeoning idea that maybe trade is a good term, go into the trades. If you can drive a truck in the Permian Basin, you can pass a drug test, you might be making $100,000 a year. If you can take a MIG torch and draw beads straight, you might be able to make, $80,000 starting out, okay? So people are looking for alternative paths, and the question they've got is, if I'm sending my students to school, Do they pick up any critical thinking? Do they pick up the ability to do their job better? If they, are we going to teach DEI to engineers, or what gets measured gets fixed? Okay, so there's really fundamental questions, and this is a session that, starting with a bill that we passed, Carl, I know you voted for this too. We basically removed DEI offices out of all of the universities in the state. And we're going to be following up on that, because again, when you emphasize a mantra, you're not emphasizing education. And I think that's what this polling is all about. And it's a pervasive, view of higher education, quite frankly, maybe even coast to coast.
Thank you. Representative Tepper?
I think one of the reasons I've been invited on this panel, my claim to fame is I was the first legislator in the country to introduce anti-DEI legislation out of the university systems. 2 years ago was my very first bill as a freshman, and boy, it was lonely for a while. We were getting browbeat by academia across the country, but there was also a spark of resistance from alumni, particularly Texas A&M of all places, who had had enough. No one had heard of DEI 2 years ago, and now it's common vernacular in our society because we've rooted it out. Ron DeSantis picked it up as governor of Florida before our bill got through, and Senator Creighton did that bill. Ron DeSantis picked it up, got a little ahead of Texas. They have a full-time legislature. So, but we pursued it. The Senate did a great job getting that through. We picked it up in the House.
I think we had a couple, like 6-8 hour debates that Senator Creighton had to take just an onslaught of this type of, of negativism, for lack of a better description, Carl.
And I was very proud of you guys. I actually attended those into the night, and that was the first time I didn't realize I was invited onto the Senate floor as a House member and got to watch from outside the rail. It was really fulfilling for me. And I'm very proud that we were able to uproot the DEI from the university system. And we've had some follow-up because we had a compromise to finally get the bill through the House that we would maintain anyone who lost their job who was in the DEI system would be able to, or offered a similar position somewhere else in the university system. And it was sort of like the Viet Cong, going into the jungle. So we've still had some flare-ups of DEI into the university system. But to circle back to the original question was, I think some of the polling reflects the parents who are sending their children to school as good kids and they come back communists or something, and they've had enough of that. I mean, we want to be able to, and the high expense of it. So I think the public universities have gotten off the rail a little bit. I was discussing with Dr. Johnson, we were both military, and the Texas university system was amazingly affordable. 30 years ago now, I graduated Texas Tech in 95. Amazingly affordable for a Division I university with a great football team and really major university, amazingly affordable. We've gotten away from that a bit. So you've got higher expenses, and you've got the ability to completely turn your kid into some weirdo communist when they go to college.
But you have to pay for it, right?
And you're paying for it, and your kids, and you're not satisfied with the result of the education. Now, to circle back, we formed these universities so that you can send blue collar people could send their kids to college, and to learn something of substantial. And I'm glad to see everybody wants to brag about their alma mater. My alma mater is taking a turn back towards Texas Tech, where it's engineering, the sciences, research, medicine, and agriculture. And we need to get back to those things, sort of the trade. There you go, guns up back there. Sort of the trades of the white collar class now, of producing something that civilization can be proud of and advancing the human condition instead of constantly browbeating the human condition, that somehow we're in a just society or something. It's just, the laws of the universe. So I think that we need to continue pushing these universities towards producing something tangible that we can use going forward.
Thank you. Dr. Johnson?
Yeah, I want to just kind of echo a little bit about what the other panelists talked about, but here's the deal. And I heard this a while back, Rep. Tapper. if you send your children to Caesar to be taught, don't be surprised when you look across the table at breakfast and see a Roman. So you have a lot of parents who are looking across the table, and they're watching Romans eat Cheerios, and they're like, wait a minute, we're not raising Romans. And so what they're doing is being disgruntled with the system that they send them to. I also happen to be, I work at Texas Public Policy Foundation, but I also happen to be on the Board of Regents at Texas Southern University, my alma mater, for where I have 2 degrees, my master's and my doctorate from Texas Southern University. And I'm proud to say that Texas Southern University does not have a DEI program, DEI office, DEI officer, or anything related to DEI, because we see that as a direct attack on the Civil Rights Act of 1964. See, we're about fighting against discrimination. And here's another thing that I'm so proud of, but it has to be from the top down, because my colleague Tom and I have just recently went to one of the universities here and to meet with their leadership, because they have 3 DEI officers. The problem with that is, and I'm gonna put on my Board of Regent cap for a moment here. One of the things I talk to my colleagues about is we're dealing in edu-business. This education is a business. I mean, you heard you heard our colleagues give their presentations yesterday and today, and share with you that $97 billion, we're putting $97 billion in education. We have 2 primary investors as a university. We have, and I talked to my colleagues about this at TSU, we have 2 primary investors, the state and the students. Now, what's the ROI, the return on investment, to our primary investors? Our primary investor, the state, is investing in our institution to educate people to bring out what? A strong workforce. That's it. And good citizens. Good citizens and a strong workforce. Now, do we have time to be dealing with politics and social issues and DEI and CR? No, there's no time for that. How well are our lawyers doing? How well are we training pharmacists? How well are we training engineers? And then our placement rating. Once they come across the stage, are we placing them into high wage jobs? Are they becoming entrepreneurs? Are they feeding into the Texas economy? Those are the things that we're looking for. And I think what higher education, and my doctorate is in higher education. Higher education has been maladaptive and inflexible to meet the demands of our primary investors, which is the state and the student. And they've been stubborn about that. They've been locked into their bubble. Many of them are tenured and feel like they can be there forever, and we need to challenge that a little bit too. So what parents and investors are saying, why shop at your store? You're not giving me what I need to help me. And when people stop shopping at our store, that means we should be going out of business, and it kind of looks that way. So what higher education is going to have to do, and what I've shared with my colleagues at TSU that we must do, we must put together a good program to put out a good product that's going to help the state and help the student and help families in Texas.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. You mentioned good citizens. Let's turn to that subject. In 2024, the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship Foundation surveyed Americans on their ability to pass the U.S. citizenship test. Now, the good news is 90% of new immigrants to this country pass the citizenship test the first time.
Because they study.
Yes. The bad news is only 19% of native-born Americans under the age of 45 can pass the test. The worst news is you only have to get 6 out of 10 right. The still worse news is they're multiple choice questions. And then to put the topper on it, my 5-year-old granddaughter got 5 out of 10 herself. So think about what that means. It's been said that you can't defend what you don't understand, right? Our students, through no fault of their own, don't understand what America is because our universities aren't teaching it, right? So, amen. Amen to that. So my question for you three, why is this decline in civic literacy occurring?
Well, we're not teaching it anymore, okay? Fundamentally, we don't focus on this. I'm reminded of a debate that we had in the House, no, it was in the Senate Education Committee. We had people that wanted to remove the 8th grade civics class. Now, we had a pretty, debate, and I just picked up the core syllabus and started reading, let's go back to the Magna Carta, English Bill of Rights, the U.S. Constitution, Tocqueville's America, just go through everything. And they pull the bill down. But you have to have the guts to stand up and say, this is important. Now, the fact of the matter is, as a mathematician, okay, if you got 4 questions on a survey, you should be able to get 25% of them right. Okay, so the fact that only 19% of Americans can pass the test is really bad. That means we're sub-random choice, okay? Now, so why? Well, if you're going to teach people that DEI is everything and that CRT is the right answer, you diminish history and you don't talk about it anymore. But if you don't teach history, you're doomed to repeat the failures of history. Now, Richard put on a really good discussion because we have to get back to teaching this. Now, we've got a program fight that's been, that TA Commissioner Morath, I think he testified in a probe for you guys this week. He's basically, the curriculum is changing again. We're going back to trying to teach this. And it's just horrifying when you see these numbers because one of the, the fact that I'm quoting from this, people don't even know that Madison was the father of the Constitution. You go down the list of this poll, it's just horrifyingly bad. So I know there's some Convention of States people in over here. They wouldn't even know who George Mason was, okay? Or why at the last moment he said, I'm kind of worried that a federal government could be tyrannical someday in the future, and we have to figure out a way to override with the states if we have to. These concepts are ingrained in what the American experience really was. And then we fought a civil war about what we couldn't resolve when we passed the Constitution. And, and now we flash forward through the American century where my dad and mother were born, and they would not recognize what the school system is producing now. They wouldn't believe that I have an avowed socialist county judge in Harris County because it wouldn't be part of their experience. But if you don't teach to this, if you don't teach history again, then you can substitute what is actual history and the learning that you need from that, all the triumphs and the tragedies of it, and you get nothing but DEI, CRT, or whatever 3-letter acronym that some leftist progressive cabal thinks of and spreads it across the country at light speed. Because what the other big advantage of, see, right now I'm having to wait to see when we're going to be called to the floor. Those type of talking points are disseminated so fast. When John Fund was working on, when he was writing for the editorial department of the Wall Street Journal, you used to have to think before you wrote. Okay? Now you just have to parrot what we saw. And in the debate, Carl, on this last ESA fight, we had people on the floor of the Senate. They weren't remembering what the history of Texas is or where we've been with ESAs. They were just reading Randy Weingarten's list of things that came from the National Teachers Union. Because if it comes on your screen, It has to be true, okay? No, that's why you have to teach civics. And look, this decay has been 20 years in the making. It's not going to get turned around overnight. But the first thing you have to do is recognize you got a problem, and we've had a big problem for 20 years, and Texas is doing something about it. And we've got not just Creighton's bill that's come out on ESAs. We got a whole shotgun ready to go on various bills, and we're going to help the education system get back to where it needs to be. But we are going to tear out by the roots all this DEI, CRT woke nonsense. It's just garbage.
And to bring it down to earth, when you're having brunch with your child, senior honor students,
This is after Cheerios, right?
it was at the diner waiting for your food. The Roman Cheerios. And you've got another honor student at Texas Tech becoming a teacher. Let's have fun with trivia, waiting for the food. Who did we fight in World War II? Complete blank looks. I mean, the whole world looks the way it does because of World War II, right? What about the Civil War? Who did we fight in the Civil War? And it's sort of the North and the South. Was it the North and the South? So when you get...
Carl had grandfathers on both sides. I'm just glad they didn't shoot each other, but go ahead. Yeah, that's right.
So when you do the Fourth on Broadway parade, big event in Lubbock every year, and the congressman's there, our mutual dear friend Charles Perry, Senator Perry, and me, and I said, watch this. And you're throwing candy to the kids, and you say, okay, it's Independence Day. Who did we fight for our independence? Complete blank looks. Wow. I mean, who was George Washington fighting? Guys, the parents don't know. The parents don't know. What are they doing all day? What's going on in school? And then you've got the communism, socialism sweeping across the university systems without realizing it's been tried. They tried it. The Pilgrims tried it. Jamestown tried it. The Soviets tried it, and it's a disaster everywhere you go. It's not a new idea. It's new to you. You're younger than we are. We had an advantage. We had the World War II movies when we grew up, and we had civics. We had movies about George Washington and Valley Forge and all that. But now they've got TikTok and pop culture, and it's just, I know you all hear this all the time, and you're probably sick of hearing it, but it's happening. And I dare you to, don't just grab a kid on the street, okay? But when you're at the family Thanksgiving,
just survey a kid, don't grab them.
Survey this, thank you. Try this, try that test. Who did we fight in World War II? And you're gonna get angry. By the way, I did who did we fight in the Mexican-American War? And I was so annoyed they were afraid to answer at that point, So we've got real problems with, and I spoke at high schools in Lubbock. I did the same thing. I talked about federal government, local, state, and okay, let's have fun with trivia. We had our calendars to give away. I had the curriculum head of the school district. My own district director is a 30-year retired teacher, former president of the Texas Teachers Association. And the teacher, and who did we fight in World War II? Who did we fight in the Civil War? The teacher was mortified. She cheated. She said, the North and the South. Some kid, he got a calendar. But I won't be, they were mortified. I won't be invited back. But I can't imagine a more serious problem. And we're wondering why we're having, crime rates and everything else that flows down. The sad thing is I can probably teach. I'm not a teacher. I love history. I read it a lot. Admittedly, it's my favorite thing. But I could probably teach American history, the highlights, Revolutionary War. You can kind of skim over the War of 1812 a little bit. You go to the Civil War and on. Probably in 2 months, 2 classes a week, probably an hour a day. You don't need to go into J.P. Morgan bailed out the federal government at some point. They can drill down into that later if they have an interest in it. but we're not getting to the basics. And by the way, I love history, but if you ask them what's 8% of 100, and they'll grab their phones. So I can't imagine. So when you try to make change and it's $1.10, you give them the extra 10 cents to make an even dollar. You've all seen this, right? When you're at the McDonald's or what have you, where they can't make the change. So Paul, I don't know, what are they doing all day? What happened? And we are feeding more money. God bless you. We are feeding more money into it. And I don't mean to be mean to our public schools or even our private schools for that matter, but I can't help as a legislator to see a horrible problem, and I don't have a solution right now, really.
Carl, all I know is that pennies cost 2 pennies now, and I'm not sure we're going to keep them. I don't think I like them. I don't want those pennies to cost 2 pennies, and I'm not sure how I did, but I know I was great at the McDonald's drive-in. I counted the change. I know I did it.
We need a separate Doge and Elon Musk for just the education system alone.
No, I agree. We do. Right.
Yeah, and let me just say, because my first degree is in history and government, and I've taught at the collegiate level, and to Senator Betancourt's point, we don't teach those things anymore, but the real question is, Rep. Tapper and I are both military guys. We know that in the military, nothing happens by osmosis. Nothing happens, it just falls out of the sky. No, that doesn't happen. If something good happened, it's somebody's fault. If something bad happened, it's somebody's fault. So the real question is, whose fault is it that we don't teach this anymore? It's our fault. Because see, I grew up in a time where when I went to elementary school, we stood up and at the beginning of class and we did the Pledge of Allegiance. And then we also did the prayer. And then we also learned about America. You see, and being a faculty member, a teacher, you test your kids. When I was, and see, I've taught, all 3 of my degrees are from HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. And so I've taught at Prairie View, I've taught at TSU, I've taught at St. Philip's, I've taught at Wiley College. And when I get my class, and be a class about this size, and if you are going to an HBCU, you probably should know something about the Emancipation Proclamation. You probably should know something about the 13th Amendment. And so I would always kind of test my kids. I always told my students, look, I'm smarter than you guys, that's why I'm teaching you, right? And so I would always do, when the semester first start, I want, out of a classroom of 35, 40 students, I want to know how many of them know anything about Emancipation Proclamation or the 13th Amendment. And it would always be about 2 or 3 that knew something about that out of 35, 45 students. And so that tells me that they don't know the Constitution. And if you don't know the Constitution, it's easy for you to hate your country. So what we have to do is we have to teach the Constitution. I got 4 kids. And by the time they were 3 years old, they knew the 13th Amendment. My little daughter, why do I have to know neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist except for a crime in America? Why do I have to know that? I said, because you're my kid and I don't want you to embarrass me. But
Tocqueville's Democracy in America is pretty good reading for a three-year-old.
Hey, man, I'm telling you right now, man, war and peace, But the thing of it is, it's our fault. We let it happen. We allowed that to happen, and thank God for our legislators right now that are willing to break the mold and bring it back, because that's what's going to transform us. Someone out in the audience said it started out in primary and secondary education, because we at TSU we have a pipeline of students. We know where they're coming from. I told them, look, give us our top 20 schools feeder patterns. We know what's coming from Yates. We know what's coming from Wheatley. We know what's coming from Cashmere. We know what's coming from Worthing. And then we know that the feeder schools that feed into them, and then we know the elementary schools that feed into them. So what we need to do is clean out our pipeline and bring civics back all the way up through our pipeline, and we'll be better off.
And before we go, I think this pipeline problem is really at the heart of some fundamental changes have to be made really with the Texas Education Agency throughout the whole public education system. But I do want to point out something before we get on to the next question is, look, the faculty senate is not the Texas Senate, okay? We've got a really big problem with faculty senates that have decided that they are into everything. Hiring, firing, curriculum standards, you know, CRT, DEI, all this type of stuff. Well, Uncle Paul's got a bill, Chairman Creighton's got a bill, we've got bills coming. I'm sure, you know, I'm sure we could find a House sponsor or two. All this has to change, and it's got to change now. And one of the reasons why Trump is accelerating, putting the foot through the floorboard, okay, to get a lot of changes done is that this stuff has to happen now. So it's not just the K through 12 system that we need to change these pipelines. We got to change it for 13 through 16, right, AKA higher education. I will tell you that as much as Carl said something positive about A&M, it was really a low point for me watching the faculty senate on a Zoom call try to figure out how to get around our bills on CRT and DEI, okay? It was at that point in time I decided that's it. We're going to take that crew out if we have to by legislation because they need to get back to teaching and stop trying to act like a legislature, okay? And I mean, it's a real problem at these schools because a lot of conservative teachers have been, you know, effectively run out of that organization and they're afraid to speak out because what happens with tenure, okay, or they just, the peer pressure. And I mean, we actually had a preposterous case where we have a president that this A&M's named, effectively founding president of it, Sol Ross. Yeah. He happened to be an Indian fighter, so therefore he was also a brigadier in the Confederate Army. And 5 profs at A&M went after him in an editorial, but they blamed the deprivations of the Texas Rangers in the 1910s and 20s on a governor who had died in the 1890s and who hired the first black head of a department in Texas history. These people that are doing this don't want people to know the truth. They want them to know what they think. And this leftist progressive woke ideology is not based in fact. I'll have a debate with anybody like Carl Richard will go sit down at any kitchen table and go over any historical record to understand what the real root of history is. But that's what you have to have, history's roots. And that's why you have to tear these DEI, these weeds up like DEI and CRT, because they're weeds. They're not fruit-bearing plants, grassland, or anything else. And I've been really concerned about what's happened to governance in the universities and this drift to leftist progressive woke behavior. And a lot of it's embedded in these faculty senates.
Well, let me just say this, because I think you're hitting the nail directly on the head when you say governance in the universities. And one of the things that I always share with our colleagues is that the tail don't wag the dog. You know, SB 17 passed. That is the law. And we as board members, we govern our universities according to what the law is. And if there are folks who are in the faculty senate, those are folks who are in the administration that are not following the law that's coming out of our legislature, then we as the governing board have to deal with that because they're in violation. But we have to have a wide and clear eye to it, and that's why within that governance of the universities, we have to operate our committees just like they operate their committees. And if we see something bubble up, we deal with it in the committees. That way we don't get no DEI, because what they'll try to do is change the language a little bit shift things around a little bit. But if we have an operating board, effective board, we can make sure that we keep on the right path, which is putting out productive people for the state of Texas.
Did the governor appoint you?
Yes.
Thank you, Governor Abbott. And I've had regents approach me about, motivated by some of the things I said. I said, it's not about the cocktail parties. Do your job. You're supposed to be checking the administration when they're overstepping, and you are the board of directors. Well, darn it, be the board of directors. Let them know the direction of this university you want it to go. You were appointed by a great governor, and follow through. And another thing that bothers me, history is not a chore. I read history. I don't know why people watch fiction. The history of, I just finished a book on Grant, Chernow did Grant. Reconstruction is much more fascinating even than the Civil War. So it shouldn't be a chore to learn this American history. It's fascinating politics and drama. And so blood, guts, and everything else. Injustices, justice, wealth, and depression. So I would recommend, for heaven's sakes, make it interesting. It should be, and it should be fascinating. It should carry them for the rest of their lives.
Thank you. Before we turn to our next topic, a couple of you mentioned governance. As a former university provost and president, I can tell you there is no book of board bylaws at any university in the country that gives the faculty senate the powers that they exercise all too often today. Right. All they are given is the power of consultation. But through a culture change, that has been translated into a culture of consent. So I'm glad that the legislature is going to do something by passing a law on this, but it's a shame because regents are fiduciaries, which in law is a very powerful term. They own the university. They have the right and the duty to uphold standards. Right? Okay.
Real quick, because I learned something, and I know that Rep. Tapper knows this too. In the military, we used to always say stuff rolled downhill. It don't roll up.
That's not the word. That's not the way I remember that word.
Yeah, that's right. Well,
you get your orders come down.
Tom, I would love to stay because this is fabulous, but I've got to run. They've just hit the recall button for the Senate.
Well, thank you for coming, Senator.
Thank you, Senator.
And
Thank you,
I'm going
Senator.
to give you a Roman handshake after a hug here, okay? Right, here we go, right here. This is what it is, the Roman handshake, okay? It's our new Roman,
Our new deal.
our anti-woke Roman.
All right, I'll switch mics with you, and then I will go over here.
I'll see you back at the building.
All right. The last 4 years, we've heard a lot about inflation. Yes? I'm going to talk about an even worse form of inflation, about which you may not have heard. Grade inflation. Let me just give you the facts. In the early 1960s, the average grade given in college for A's was 15%, 15%. But today, an A is the most common grade given in college. 46% of all college grades given today are A's. 80% are A's or B's. Prospective employers say, we can't tell when we get transcripts for people applying for jobs right out of college because it's all monopoly money grades. Right? Look, all the world's major philosophers, all the world's major religions agree on a fundamental truth, and that is that life is difficult. And therefore, we develop the virtues of mind and character enabled to deal successfully with life's natural, inevitable difficulties. Grade inflation teaches our students exactly the opposite thing. Right? So, in 2013, the Texas House of Representatives passed what is called the Contextualized Transcript Bill. It died in the Senate. It got passed by a first-time senator who just became Trump's secretary for HUD, Scott Turner. He was a first-term representative in 2013. All his bill did, it didn't try to impose a grading curve on the universities. It didn't try to micromanage. All it did was this. It proposed that on the official Texas transcript, say you took Biology 101 and you got a B. Next to your individual grade, it would put in parenthesis the average grade the professor gave the whole class. That's all, right? That's because that tells prospective employers, graduate school admissions committees, where you stack up, right? My question for you two, is it time for Texas to reintroduce the contextualized transcript bill?
I might have a contrary opinion. I wish I had had A's just given to me in college. Honestly, I didn't know this was a problem, and I'm sure it stems from everyone gets a trophy. Right. So if we need to look at that, we will. I've got almost 60 bills already. As a matter of fact, my staff is looking at me. They're about to go on strike, and we're not a union shop. So we will absolutely look at that if it needs to be addressed. I can't imagine. I do know one of the problems, circling back to what we've been discussing, is that you're interviewing students, the surprise interview on campus. Again, who did we fight in the Civil War? They don't know, so they have to take American history and Texas history. I believe is still part of the curriculum. So how did they get out of those classes and still don't know these things? So someone somehow got out of that class without knowing anything. I do know college is not that hard. My advice to any freshman is show up to class, read the material they gave you. If you don't understand it, are not going to understand it, go to office hours. The teachers will usually hold your hand and get you through it. Mostly it's getting into college, being able to afford it, and then showing up like everything else in life. So if we need to address the curve in college grades, we will do so.
Thank you.
Meritocracy is under attack all over the place. It's everybody gets a trophy. Well, my youngest boy plays basketball, and first time he came home with a couple trophies, and then next time I said, man, it seems like you guys. I said, who won? He said the other team won. I said, why'd you guys get a trophy? He said, well, everybody gets a trophy. And then this went on. I said, how many points did you score? He said, I didn't score any points. I said, how many rebounds you get? I didn't get any rebounds. How many assists did you get? I said, what's your stats look like? Well, he said, what stats? I say, look here, bro, hold up. You're a Johnson. You don't take trophies and you ain't earned them. So you need to figure out what the stats are, and you need to contribute before you start taking trophies. Don't take a medal. Don't take a grade if you don't earn it. And that started. It didn't start necessarily in higher ed, but it shifted up to higher ed, and higher ed embraced it through the faculty senate. Because why did the faculty senate embrace it? Because the faculty senate want to look good. They want to show how well their students are doing, and they started doing what we call grade inflation. And so you're really doing a C performance and getting an A. And so one of the things that we have to do, it's unfortunate that it has to be done through legislation, because it should be done at the institutional level. You have to have certain institutions that'll say no more. You're going to make it based on your merit, and we have to get back to that as a country.
I have to say, Doctor, it's easy to pick on the universities on this one. I remember. This is the danger of using the military as a social experiment. You'll remember it was particularly tough in the Army. It permeated the Army where they were giving ribbons and medals for every little thing. Yeah. And privates were showing up at the airport. They looked like General MacArthur with all the ribbons and things they had. And really, a lot of them were not substantial things that they had achieved to obtain those ribbons and those citations. So it's not just, you said it's permeating society in general, and it certainly is. And a lot of it started with the military, and that needs to be rolled back as well. But don't
let higher ed off the hook.
No, I wouldn't.
Because higher education, we depend on these universities to produce the best and the brightest. And we must make them produce the best and the brightest for Texas. Because at the end of the day, we're now the 8th largest economy in the world, moving toward the 7th largest economy in the world. And we cannot afford to have mediocre folks in high places. So we have to keep that burden on them.
And there are certain skill sets that you just can't compromise. Obviously, MDs, nurses. I just read about a high-rise in New York City that's off-kilter, severely off-kilter, and it's a disaster. In New York City, one of the skyscrapers is leaning so substantially that it might fall over. And it's abandoned, it's under receivership, no one knows what to do with it. So engineering, you can't screw around with some of these. As a political science major, I can be a disaster, okay? And we see it all over the country. But as an MD, an engineer in agriculture and some of these things, we cannot compromise.
I know that I was a college professor for 40 years, and I know that nothing wrong with student evaluations of professors. It gives you good information. The problem is they have become so important because administrators want to make easy decisions. The best way to do student evaluations is to have the student write it essay style, because then when the dean reads the professor's evaluations, it tells them what the student thinks of the professor, but it also tells them something about the student. But they don't have time for that anymore, so now they do it multiple choice, and then they can tell a professor, well, you're a 3.7 and you're only a 3.2, right? And studies have shown, surprise, surprise, that teachers who give out more A's get better student evaluations, right? So that's the problem. And you know what Richard and Representative Tepper have said is very true. I'm glad that the legislature is addressing this dysfunctionality, but they shouldn't have to do it. Professors should be doing this out of a sense of honor. Teaching is a vocation, and it is impossible to execute that vocation in the proper way if you don't have rigorous standards.
I'm glad you said that. We're getting to the point where we're having to micromanage. Our legislation is starting to micromanage every little particular step of American life.
Right.
And we just can't, that's a disaster. We can't get there. Whether student behavior in school, that we have some really comprehensive bills on student behavior and penalties, but we really have to have a bill on a student hitting a teacher. You know, that has to be legislated, and I'm embarrassed that we're having to legislate that. And there's so many more examples of things that over society, what used to be basic decency, we're having to legislate. I'm not the biggest, I don't usually, pound on scripture in the church, but for heaven's sakes, take your kids to church. There has to be absolutes that are beyond, government can't give you those absolutes. You can only get it from scripture and from those ancient traditions, and I would argue real spirituality, that you're not going to get from government. So we cannot legislate just common decency. We're going to have to turn back the clock a little bit and get back to those things that did work in the past.
One of the things, amen to that. One of the things that we look at, and I've been proud of this over the years. I'm a 60s kid. I was born in 61, so I kind of grew up in the 60s and 70s. And so I've been pretty proud of the business model, the programming model at schools like Texas Southern, because coming out of the 60s, it was a big fight for equality. That's what the civil rights movement was all about. A fight for equality, not equity. Keep equity, that's not it. Equality. No one ever fought for equity. We fought for equality, just an equal opportunity. That's it. And if we could just give us an equal shot, we'll take it from there. But it used to be this thing when I was growing up in Houston, say, well, look, it's easy to get in TSU, but it's hard to get out. And I say, well, they're going to give you an equal shot to come in. We're going to give you an equal chance. You can come in, but now everything else, once you are sworn into the university, everything else is based on how hard you work, your merit. And so we have to get back to merit-based operations in all of our sectors. Because if we don't get back to merit-based operations, we're going to continue to perpetuate failure. And we don't want to do that because we're competing not only against the other states in America, we're competing against, this is a global competition now. I tell my little kids, you're competing against folks in China, you're competing against folks in Africa, Asia, all over the planet. So you have to study hard, you have to work hard, and you have to put in the work, and we have to reward that. One of the things that I learned, my master's degree is in clinical psychology. If you reward bad behavior, you're just gonna get more of it. But if you reinforce and reward good behavior, you're gonna get more of that. So the way to deal with even this DEI situation, we have to reinforce those institutions and reward those institutions that are eradicating DEI and safe places away from DEI, and then remove rewards and reinforcement from those faculty senators who are fighting against it until they get the message.
Amen to that. Thank you both. Now it's time for us to hear from you. We have some time here for questions and answers. We have a question up in front. Hold on. Kate is going to bring you the microphone.
Because that helps you.
I think I'm on.
That helps
Okay.
you record it. Yeah.
So it's not clear to me, even if we mandate the teaching of civics in K through 12 and higher ed, that the teachers that we're going to assign that duty to are going to necessarily support that. What can be done? What can be done to reform our colleges of education?
Well, let me start with one of the greatest appointments Governor Abbott ever made was Mike Morath. And there's a new curriculum out there called the Bluebonnet curriculum. Are y'all familiar with that? It's been controversial because it infuses cultural and religious stories into the reader. It's important to remember the context of the lessons. So if we all know what the Good Samaritan is, right? We also know it's scriptural. I mean, if I use the term Good Samaritan in conversation, you're going to know what it means and where it came from. That's all we're trying to achieve, is getting back to context for our cultural knowledge. And so I'm hoping that locking down the curriculum will be of assistance and a standardized curriculum. I mean, from my understanding, some of the K through 12 curriculum was coming off the internet from who knows where. So there were some things at the State Board of Education, certain curriculums that they approved, but I don't think that was always being followed. So we are trying to, with the Bluebonnet curriculum, right now it's voluntary, but we are going to heavily incentivize, if not mandate, a certain standard of curriculum that had worked over time. And hopefully that will help us get to where we need to get. If you're challenging teachers and their intentions, we're going to have to dive into, again, those are the type of things I don't want to have to legislate. If a teacher gets accredited, they're supposed to have the knowledge, hopefully some decent social decency, I'll say. We should be able to get back to where we need to be. I understand your suspicion. I'm cynical too. But shoot, man, there's only so far we can go in micromanaging everyone's attitudes and opinions. I do know if there are outrageous instances of opinion in the classroom, we will address it. But hopefully, I'm sitting in Austin trying to say I don't want to address it. Austin's one of the worst, examples. The trouble we always have, the great Senator Charles Perry, my senator, always says, we're always legislating to the lowest common denominator, and it tends to mess up everybody else down the line because they were already doing it right. So we need to be careful of how far we get with the legislation on micromanaging these issues.
And I don't think it's necessarily, again, should be a legislative function, because those sorts of things ought to be taken care of within the institutions. And to answer your question about the teachers and making sure that they're following the curriculum that has come down, if they're not doing it, I really like the Trump doctrine. Why are you here? You're gone. I mean, you get somebody to do it. That is it. And that's the way we govern at Texas Southern. We hired a president, and here is the policy. Here are the policies. And all I need to know is, are we carrying out the policies? And I need to verify that. And if we're not doing it, do we need to create some learning experiences for people in order to get on board and get the policies carried out? At the end of the day, we have to have a zero tolerance, because if you don't have a zero tolerance for folks who are moving away, they're going to keep doing the exact same thing. And I see that all over America with DEI. They're just changing the language and keeping the same thing. That's not going to work.
You need to be
anymore.
very tough on your school boards.
Yes.
And I don't mean outrageously tough. If they're doing a good job, thank them. But if they're stepping out of line, we've had stories all over, particularly the Austin area, Eanes ISD, Austin Independent School District. We've had issues with South Lake, Carroll, Round Rock. Speak up and get out there, get your candidates out there, vote, and get them inserted so that they're doing their job in a meaningful way.
And at the higher ed level, and just one last thing, I see some other hands going up. I want to get to you guys. But at the higher ed level, for public schools, we're appointed by the governor, a conservative governor. And so we all ought to be kind of on the same page. And so if we're on the same page, you should not see a lot of that going on at our colleges and universities. You shouldn't see the appointer who appoints the appointees say that we're anti this via legislation and the appointees not carrying that out. You shouldn't see that. And so in doing so, and we always say this, the tail don't wag the dog. The Board of Regents, we're responsible for the university. We hire a president, and he hires administrations to work at the behest of the board, and we work at the behest of the governor.
Thank you both. I think what you're hearing from both, and then we'll turn to our next question, is a number of these problems are really not challenges to the intellect. We have solutions, such as simply making transcripts transparent. The challenge is to the moral will. The challenge is to the will to act. Yes, sir.
So I'm a trustee at Florida Poly, and I want to say that we at Texas, Florida covets two of our rules that we have. 51301, which was back in the 20s, that required 6 hours of government political science, and 51302, which requires 6 hours of history. And Representative Tepper, you said, why, if we know American history, why don't these people know that? Well, because at University of Texas, there's 31 courses that fulfill that history, right? And at A&M, I think there's 7, and one of them, I think, is understanding the nuclear age or nuclear bomb or something. Although that's a wonderful thing to take, that does not fulfill the bounding. And Tom was a part of some legislation by the lieutenant governor back when he was a senator that I believe needs to be put that back on track.
Dr. Johnson, well, in the universities, we still have requirement for American history and Texas history. Is that correct?
Yeah, you do have requirements, but there again, you know, we don't place as much as we should, and we're starting to do it now. Where I am is placing more emphasis on civics and history, because I have a history degree. So you get it from the top down. You get it from the top down, and the basics is not going to be enough. The basics is not what you see. If you got to take 3 hours or 6 hours, or it may be social studies or something like that'll compensate for it, or that you can interchange out. We need to be specific about history, American history and Texas history.
Well, Richard, one other thing is that you have those 6 hours. You could curate that together in a fashion like you said before, which was to make the people, understand the system. If you understand the system and you know it can be changed and you have confidence in that change, you will grow together as people. So
Sure.
you could do some curation around those 6 hours or 12 hours and more. And really use that as a basis for your civics or part of your civics. I don't know, you're an educator.
Oh yeah, but Tom and I are working on that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and part of the issue here, there was a bill introduced that then Senator Dan Patrick introduced. He put together a great bill. In the two-course American history requirement goes back to a 1955 law. What happened was Texas legislators saw our Korean War veterans coming back, some of whom were victims of what was a new word then, brainwashing, right? And they said, how can this happen? We've got to teach civics better. So what did they do? They required 6 hours of American history and 6 hours of American government. It got codified in the Texas Education Code in 1971. Now, 99% of kids who go to college don't major in history. Okay? So it's very clear from the intent of the law that this was meant to be a survey course. But a nonprofit education organization did a study of UT's courses for American history. And they allow special topics courses to satisfy the requirement. Moreover, they found that 69% of the content of those courses was race, class, gender, right? So that is something that needs to be restored. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, great.
You need the microphone, but while she's coming with the mic, Tom is spot dead on. We don't want them transferring trading those classes out. We want them to be able to have to take those classes. And of course, I mean, I have a degree in history, so I'm one of that 1% that really majored in history. But we need to have that where it's a basic foundational course, where it has to be in your foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Thank you.
Well, thank you for this fascinating discussion. So Dr. Lindsay, I think that on the topic of providing faculty feedback, I love your idea about having the students write an essay talking about their courses and so forth. Maybe one way to do it is just say that this is part of your final grades. And write an essay, tell us how this professor teaches, the difficulty, the level of difficulty of the course. And if we could implement that across all the courses, we can tell who are the best teachers and who are actually not. Just make it part of the grade, right? And another thing about
I have to say, I think there are, it's gotten to be like Yelp for courses.
Yeah.
And I think they've been valuable for students
Yeah.
where the course is judged
Yeah.
at length.
And I don't think it's a waste of time, because all of us will have to give feedback to our subordinates, to our, like our supervisors, whatnot, at some point. It's a great skill to have, and why not practice in college? So the second thing is that to combat grade inflation, I got to tell you that it's not just in colleges, even in middle school.
Oh, yes.
The part of it is parents. parents come to school and tell teachers, please do not grade so hard on my kids. We want them to have confidence. I understand the importance of having confidence, but at the same time, we're not going out to collect A's knowing that they have some knowledge holes that they need to fill, right? And so I wonder, well, back in the days when I was in college, that was a long time ago, 2 decades ago, every course was graded on a curve. So you set your curve on a B minus, whatever you want to set it. Well, I don't believe setting it at an A is right? So but setting on a B minus, so whoever does really well, the top 5%, whatever, get A and whatnot, and whatever, you curve it. And I don't know if it's feasible or possible to even codify it, but if higher education is going that way, then we truly can tell if the students are really, doing service to their time there, and if they're if their tuition's well spent.
Absolutely right. Yes, ma'am, in the back there. You've had your hand up for a long time.
I still have. I'm really into talk. I'm a lawyer. I love talking. But I think, well, I'm also really loud. But anyway.
Got to have a question mark at the end.
I do. It's that's not my point, but thank you. But anyway, but I think that when it comes to the kind of changes and the kind of trouble that we're in, the missing thing's accountability. It's accountability. If you've got two clients, one's the government, they need to meet the standards or they don't get the money. And that's just that. And those standards need to be written. They need to be high. It needs to be meritocracy. And then I'm the product of Christian schools up until Texas Tech.
Yeah.
I took a test. Every year I took a test. And I took a test to get into Tech. And I took a test to get into law school. I was the youngest woman in law school because I got out of Tech in 3 years. There's testing. What happened to standardized testing and meeting standards every year? So we knew what was going on. That costs almost nothing. And that's how you hold the students accountable. So what happened to the accountability? What happened to testing? And at what point do you say to a university, you are not meeting the standard by which we're giving you the money, and we're going to stop giving you the money till you do. Work it out. Talk as much as you want.
Yeah, so I've got a bill right now that checks the degree programs. So if you're not making, there's a ratio. If you've got a certain debt to your income after 2 years, we're going to start looking at those programs and even forcing retirement of those programs. So because all the universities this is a broader discussion. It's been an arms race with the university system. I need to be careful what I say here. I sit on Article 3 again of appropriations. We fund the university systems at K through 12. We've been throwing money at the university systems and getting fewer results. And it's our fault. Yeah, well, I hear you. And so it's been an arms race with the rivalries of the state universities. So between Texas State, Texas Tech, A&M, University of Texas, it's absolutely been an arms race in what programs they can tackle and are they going to space. One university system has a ship, and I mean it is a ship. It's like a giant cruise ship. The federal government bought the ship. We're going to have to maintain the ship and everything around it. But it's been an arms race, and I'm aware of it. I'm going to try to start a discussion about that in appropriations this year. So I'm warning you, Stan Kitzman just became Article 3 chairman, that I'm going to bring this up. And of course, I have constituency. My home district is Texas Tech, so I'm going to be careful. But there's good research they're doing and really good things and really monumental things. So I know we're here to beat up on them a little bit. But there are some amazing things coming out of these institutions. But on the other hand, do they all need to be doing that same amazing thing at every campus? So we're starting to look at that and have them focus on things that's their specialties and go with that. And if they're not producing, we are going to start pulling the funding, or I'm going to try to start pulling the funding. And that's why we're looking at sunsetting certain degree programs if they're not being effective at that institution. So art history might be, stand by, art history might be great at the University of Texas, but I'm not sure we need to have a major of it at Texas A&M. So if art history is your thing, then UT is going to be your institution and most likely the place you're going to land, and A&M is going to be your other, maybe agriculture or engineering. So we're going to start looking at.
Get clearer than that, you can get down to, are people getting the jobs? Are they getting the education and are they getting the jobs?
And I just told you, I answered your question. I said we're going to start tracking their degrees and income and the ratios and the cost of benefit and sunsetting that.
I've been a Texan my whole life, cut the football.
Good luck with that. I hope you run hope you run for office with that.
Or the border.
Well, ma'am, as they used to say on TV, you get the last word, counselor. I'm afraid that we're out of time, but please join me in thanking our two guests. And if I could just sum up, I'll try to sum up in one sentence what we heard. No country in the history of the world has ever subsidized through our tax dollars an education system intent on teaching our children to hate the country that they live in. We're here to prevent America from becoming the first to do that. Thank you all.